If you look at the numbers behind incontinence in women, it's hard to believe just how big an issue it is. Incontinence affects more women than diabetes, breast cancer, and heart disease, but it doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves. That's why the National Association for Continence has created the We Count campaign to help you realize that this isn't just a you problem, it's an us problem. There are treatments available right now that can make a real difference in your life, and we invite you to take action today. Visit nafc.org/we-count for essential facts, insights, and resources on stress and urge incontinence, overactive bladder, menopause-related leakage, and more. That's nafc.org/we-count to learn more and discover that there truly is strength in numbers.
Life Without Leaks is brought to you by the National Association for Continence. NAFC is America's leading advocate for patients with bladder and bowel conditions, with resources, connections to doctors, and a welcoming community of patients, physicians, and caregivers, all available at nafc.org. Welcome to Life Without Leaks. This is a podcast that's aimed at the incontinence community, trying to discuss some of the solutions that are available to them, discuss some of the challenges that people face, give people a comfortable and welcoming environment where they can discuss solutions and approaches to try and help live a better life despite incontinence or overcome the challenges of incontinence. So with us today, we have Steve Gregg. Steve is the Executive Director of the National Association for Continence. Welcome, Steve. How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And also joining us is Robin Stern, and Robin has been working with the National Association for Continence for, a number of years now, and really has a sense of what the organization does and some of the challenges also from a personal perspective, not just looking at it as an organization. Hello, Robin. How are you?
Hi, so glad to be here and so glad to be able to discuss something that people don't really like to discuss and people are kind of ashamed of discussing. And we just want to make it mainstream and be able to come up with ideas and discuss things that we can do to help you.
In Western society, apparently we don't talk about bodily habits. It's just not something that we do. There are other countries that do a really nice job, Australia, for example. But what is odd is, if you think about things that humans do every day, we do 3 things every day. You have to take in some food and beverage, right? You have to have some form of nutrition, and it's processed, and you need to pee and poop. All of us, and there's no exception. And by the way, if you don't pee or poop, that's a bigger problem. So we all do it, but we don't like to talk about it.
Yeah, I think the only time people are ever comfortable talking about it is making jokes. And it's something either so intensely personal that everybody's afraid to, or it just becomes something that people laugh at. And neither one of those is really productive when it comes to addressing problems. Because this is a pretty big problem area for a lot of people. How many people do suffer from some form of incontinence? What are we looking at?
So the numbers are astronomical. So if you look at overactive bladder, which is just another name for urge incontinence, which means when I have to go right this minute, right now. I can't wait. There are probably 35 million symptomatic Americans. When you look at stress urinary incontinence, which is you leak a little bit when you laugh, sneeze, cough, pick up a baby, there are probably another 35 symptomatic Americans. So that's 70. And then you add in bowel-related issues, it's probably another 10 to 20 million people. So roughly 70 to 90 million Americans, adult Americans, are challenged by this, which makes it the largest problem facing the American population today, and nobody talks about it.
That's unbelievable. I'm just trying to think of the numbers. It's like 325 million Americans. So we're talking about something on the order of 1 out of 3 people, if assuming that there's no overlap. But even if it's not that, we're still talking about 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 people who has some sort of issue. It's like shockingly surprising how big a problem it really is.
Well, the rule of thumb is that 1 in 3 women over 18 will experience leakage problems in their life. And so the way to think about that is, if you remember back to freshman chemistry class, when they said, look to your right, look to your left, and at the end of the semester, 2 of those people won't be here. So if you're a woman that's over 18, you look to the right, you look to the left, and if neither of them leak, it doesn't look good for you.
That's true, I suppose. Yeah. So
I think a really important point to discuss in is it's very similar to mental illness, because in mental illness, you don't want to talk about it. And incontinence, you don't want to talk about it either. And look at the problems that we've had because of not talking about it. So I'd like to showcase the fact that this is a problem. This is a national problem. It's a problem we don't discuss. And there are solutions and there are treatments, and we want to make people aware of those.
That is another thing. That's a pretty important point, actually. I mean, do you get the sense, Steve? I mean, you work every day with patients and physicians. Do people just not understand that there are real, actual solutions that are out there for them, and that this is a condition that really can be addressed?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really big problem. When people come to nafc.org or they come to us, they typically ask a series of questions. What is this? They often ask, why is it happening to me? And that's a question we can never really answer. What can I do about it? And we do have recommendations on that. And then who do I talk to who can help me with that? So if you think of those three questions, what is this? What can I do about it? And who do I talk to? We start trying to push them into a variety of treatment options and management solutions.
Is there such a thing as a typical patient? I mean, I guess considering the fact that there's a whole range of different conditions that people can have. But, if we look at, say, for example, overactive bladder, is there sort of a typical patient profile and a series of relatively common sorts of therapies that they might be presented with?
Well, they're mostly unique, but for overactive bladder, to add a little more depressing statistics against this, from the onset of symptoms to the time they seek treatment is on average about 7 years.
Wow.
So people are trying to find their own solution and suffering through this. And what is even more depressing is it is usually some type of catastrophic event that occurs that forces them in to see their doctor. The one we hear most often is, I was at my daughter's wedding and I wet myself in the front of my dress. And I can't think of anything that would be more tragic than that. But it's still 7 years. And then sadly, of those that are symptomatic, only 1 in 3 typically ever seeks treatment. So they're either using home remedies, which are not particularly good for you, right? Which could be double underwear, paper towels. Sometimes it's feminine hygiene products, or they move to things that you can buy over the counter. So it would be pads, pull-ups, guards, shields, those kinds of things. But rarely do they go in and talk to a doctor about it. We are seeing, to our delight, more and more men and women are actually raising it with their doctors. So that's the good news. The bad news is they're actually raising it mostly with things like primary care, who have very limited time and very limited understanding of incontinence. And so the solutions haven't been great coming out of primary care.
To go back for a second, one of the things you were saying that I think is encouraging, I suppose, is that we're seeing a lot more advertising for absorbent products and for other sorts of solutions. And nobody really likes to be marketed to or advertised to, but I do think that just hearing it more often probably is really helpful, because it normalizes it, makes people realize that they don't have to be uncomfortable talking about it. They don't have to be uncomfortable trying to find a product that works for them. I mean, are you seeing that that's the case, that the taboo is starting to fall away a little bit?
Well, I think that some of the television advertising, if there were a variety of treatments and treatment options, would go to that, right? Disease awareness, go in and talk to your doctor. I joined NAFC in 2014, and in that time, there has been one new pharmacological product brought to market. It costs on average about $2.5 billion to bring a product to market these days, and so the return has to be significant. So that said, in that same time, since I joined NAFC, there have been approximately 14 new type 2 diabetes drugs. And we actually know what causes type 2 diabetes and what some of the treatment options are. There hasn't been enough investment in this space to raise awareness that there are new and effective treatment options.
It's amazing when you consider the size of the market that there hasn't been more investment into research and development. Is there a reason for that?
I don't know specifically. What we have heard for a long time is that it's primarily a woman's problem. That actually is not true. And What women have been told historically is, first, there's nothing we can do about this. And that's not true. Or you shouldn't have had those babies, because those babies are a large reason why some of this occurs. I can't believe somebody would actually say that in the 2020s, but we still hear that. So they've been told that sort of it's something you've got to suffer with and get over. Men, on the other hand, when they raise the issue of leaking or control, we see them being sent to specialists, urologists, much quicker, which we think is largely due to a concern about prostate health. So men sort of get a very different path to treatment than women do.
Is there truly a greater prevalence among women, or is it just that men, for whatever reason, don't seem to get any attention?
The numbers are pretty close together. I mean, when we see it and we do survey work, we see sort of 65% women, 35% men. I think the literature says that things like stress urinary incontinence is close to 50-50. It's 52, 48%, something like that. The other piece that's actually interesting is we have seen data that suggests that in a family, when she has her first baby, he becomes the largest child in the house. That is, men typically give up the right to their health care because she solves the baby's problems and his problems. So largely what we're seeing is that when men talk to a doctor about this, it's because of encouragement from a spouse, a partner, a loved one that actually forces him in to actually seek care. She's a little more proactive in trying to figure this out.
Well, that's interesting. I guess that sort of fits into that stereotype of the woman as the nurturer and the man as the rugged individualist. So unless she's the one who recognizes there's a problem and goes out and helps others, and he just sort of is a little too macho for his own good until he's compelled to go, I suppose. That's interesting.
I think it's really important to raise awareness of the problem and make it not a stigma anymore. It is such a big problem, and we have so many diseases and so many issues in the country right now that this doesn't get enough attention.
Yeah, Robin, I wouldn't be surprised that if you went to a gathering of some of your female friends, dinner or something like that, or a glass of wine, and you stood there long enough, somebody would make a comment about it. Either have any of you have the same experience, or what the hell is this, or why didn't anybody tell me as I got older?
Don't make me laugh. I have to run to the bathroom, for example.
They tend to talk a little more to each other, and we haven't been able to crack how to get them to talk to each other and then have somebody say, their organizations like NAFC, that can answer some of those questions honestly, appropriately, and then maybe give you something you can try on your own before you have to see a physician. But then how do you find the right physician? And then how do you have a meaningful conversation with that physician?
Yeah, there is a ton of misinformation and misunderstanding out there, isn't there?
There is. I was recently at a place watching something on television, and a lot of the supplement stuff is not regulated by the FDA. And I was listening to, sort of a direct ad about some supplement that would cure all your bladder-related issues. And what we've seen recently is there is a population of those individuals that truly believe that as the problem gets worse, they are no longer in control of their life. They're not trying to be controlling, but it's like, my body's letting me down. I don't know how to control this. And they're willing to try almost anything, supplements, things, exercises, to see if they can get back to some degree of what they would consider normality. And some of it they can do, but some of it they're just wasting money and time, but they're desperate for a solution.
But not desperate enough to go to a physician who has real proven solutions necessarily.
Yeah, but again, if they go in to see a primary care, and not all primary cares, but a lot of primary cares, the research we saw from 2010, so it's old, was primary care sees a patient every 8 minutes. And so if you come into my office and we talk about your blood pressure, we talk about your vitals, right? So cholesterol, how you're doing, maybe your weight, not typical. My 8 minutes is about up. And then when you say, gee, I'm starting to have some problem with incontinence, that's a really big conversation that they're oftentimes not prepared for. So one of two things happen. The lucky ones are referred on to a specialist, an incontinence specialist, or they get a prescription for some medication, usually, more often than not, an older medication that has side effects. And if she goes away and never calls back. The doctor says, I did a great job because I gave her a script and she's happy. And we know she's not on medication in 3 weeks.
So what would be the best course of action if somebody is trying to find a legitimate solution to their problem?
So there are really two big groups. They're the urogynecologists, and they tend to be more focused on women's pelvic floor health. Problem is there are only about 2,500 of those in America.
Wow.
And then the urologists are really a good source to talk to a good urologist. Within the urologists, there are some that are very focused on female pelvic health. There's actually a specialty for that. So it's not just traditional old-fashioned urology. They're pretty good at knowing all of the treatment options. And there's some really, really good institutions. The problems are, if you live in rural America or you live in places that are not very populated, it's oftentimes really difficult, like in all professions, medical professions, to find somebody who's really qualified.
Do you think that nowadays, with telehealth becoming more commonplace and easier to access, that might be making a difference for people who don't necessarily have direct access?
We're really hopeful that telehealth makes a difference. One of the things, again, there are only 10,000 urologists, so oftentimes when she wants to get in to see one, the wait times are really long. And if telehealth does nothing else other than getting them in to have their initial conversation and lay out a treatment plan, here's what we're going to do from step to step at this kind of time, then at least she has an idea of what she's going to do. The first steps are typically behavioral modifications. So you can imagine, Bruce, if you and I went in and started talking to a doctor and started talking about things, and he said, well, Bruce, maybe you shouldn't have those 3 martinis after 9 o'clock at night, and then you wouldn't be getting up all night going to the bathroom. Once you eliminate those kinds of things, and then you start doing things like pelvic floor exercises, both for men and women, now you're making a progress, and they can get to, okay, now this is a real serious problem. And it's given them enough time to evaluate how serious the problem typically is.
So now, where does physical therapy fit into this?
It's a really great first start. There are about 2,500 pelvic floor physical therapy specialists. And if you can find one of them, and you can find them through their website, the American Physical Therapy Association, APTA, if you can find one of them, they're oftentimes really great. And what I like about them, besides them being able to help specific immediate symptoms, is they're really good at identifying when you really do need to go see a doctor. So it's like, if I can't help you, I know where to send you.
And they can, and they're the ones who can really be helpful. Well, I suppose a physician also, but a PT is really good for things like helping you with pelvic floor exercises and things of that nature that can make a real difference also.
Yeah, we have a number of partners that create devices. Apparently one of the hard things with Kegel exercises, pelvic floor exercises, and Robin, you probably hear this with your girlfriends too, is, I'm doing these exercises, but nothing's happening. And the way that we hear physical therapists talk about is if you look at somebody and they got this crunched up face stuff, they look at them immediately and go, they're not doing it right. Also, sometimes it's loosening muscles and sometimes it's strengthening muscles. So having somebody who can help you do it correctly. The thing we love about some of our friends is, this digital world is they use devices, and the devices measure pressure. So if you're strengthening those muscles, we know what the force is, and we know whether you're getting better, and you can see improvement. So it's not like the old days where you just sit and do these exercises. They actually can give you feedback to make sure you're doing them both correctly and you're making progress.
Well, that's very cool. That's helpful, I can imagine. I guess it's one of those things where, and once you learn how to do it and you know that you're doing it right, then you can just continue to do it yourself without the need for that sort of feedback or instruction.
It's sort of that old adage, right? When people used to say practice makes perfect, and those athletes would say, no. Perfect practice makes perfect.
That's right. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, you practice doing something wrong, and all you're doing is reinforcing the wrong thing. Now, so tell me this. So what do you see as NAFC's role? Maybe tell me a little bit about the organization and what you see as NAFC offering to people who are part of the community.
We are a national nonprofit. We were founded in 1983 in Spartanburg, South Carolina, by a woman who was way ahead of her time recognizing that those individuals with incontinence needed help and resources to find out how to get the care they needed. We are focused almost exclusively on bladder and bowel dysfunction. We loosely say we focus on belly button to knees. We cover men and women through the entire life stage. So we also know that women will have incontinence or leaking related problems prior to childbirth, between children, midlife, and then perimenopause and menopause. And then men often will have stress urinary incontinence or incontinence related problems. And then post prostatectomy, incontinence can be a real issue. It can be such an issue that we're actually having occasionally men contact us and say, I never would have had prostate cancer surgery if I had known about the level of incontinence that I was going to have. And we think that's tragic.
Yeah.
Both we should have been made aware, or there should have been a treatment plan available. But it tells you how significant that kind of problem is. What we do is we make sure they understand what the conditions are, and then who to talk to and how to talk to them. And then with our doctor locator and that kind of thing, we try to get them into somebody who can take care of them.
Oh, so I can go and find a doctor. You're talking about how it's not always easy to find somebody who's really qualified. So you could help me do that then.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, that's awesome. So you said that you're a nonprofit. How do you guys how do you survive?
We work with most of the industry partners in the space, all of them. So both pharma, med device, therapies. So we essentially work with everybody. And by that, we make sure that there is no dominant voice other than ours. So we make sure that we are completely non-biased, but we are informative across the spectrum. We rely on the kindness of strangers, those that either have had a problem. It's funny, Bruce, now when you think about, am I doing a good job and are we making success? A couple times a year, I will get a letter or a note. And the note may be very simple and say something like, thank you very much because you helped me at a time when I was having a hard time managing my mother's health-related issues. And that heartfelt thanks means a great deal to us. So we are delighted to hear that we're helping those people. We don't always know, but we like to know, we like to believe that we're helping more people than not.
And I suppose that because you have this really a really powerful presence online. There's a ton of resources available at nafc.org, all sorts of education and free downloads with brochures and trackers and bladder diaries and things of that nature. That being able to find all these things with the anonymity of the internet probably makes it easier for people to make use of everything you offer.
Yeah, we hope so. We do a lot on social media, which is primarily around awareness. To Robin's point, how do you raise awareness that this is a problem that we all need to address and that there are solutions available? And then we have resources, tips, guides, a plethora of information at nafc.org. And then we have a small but very robust community that people join, because it turns out, not surprisingly, what happens is people say, I got this problem. Now you've told me what we can do. Can I talk to somebody like me? And that is a forum. It is monitored. It is carefully reviewed. So there's no selling going on. Nobody's going to sell you a supplement. There's no Uhimbi bark going to be offered in those kind of things. And you get both streams that come from us about topics to let people talk about it. And we will often, if somebody goes down a rabbit hole that's incorrect, we will make sure that we provide the right kind of advice. We don't provide medical advice, but we can provide information that would help them go in and have a meaningful conversation with a physician.
The idea of community has got to be really powerful because, incontinence can be so isolating, I suppose. People they're ashamed to tell anybody. They feel like they can't go out anywhere. It really is life limiting, isn't it?
One of the things that we've just started looking at based on the new research project is we're starting to look at ageism, this idea that when you get older, you're not as vital or important anymore, and that drives isolation. And I've recently seen some numbers that isolation in aging populations can dramatically shorten the length of their life because they're not part of a community and some of the things that we do when we're younger. And one of the things we know for sure is incontinence drives isolation. To make matters worse, this affects all socioeconomic groups. And so when you look at those that struggle, and we worried about this tremendously during the first year of the pandemic, if they don't have money for supplies, pads, pull-ups, those kinds of things, they're making decisions that a lot of households make, but they're balancing, do I buy food? Do I buy medication? Do I buy incontinence products? Do I pay rent? Or do I pay utilities? And so you have families that are making very hard decisions. And right now, there's not a way to particularly help them. There is a little money set aside for Medicaid to help some folks provide products. But we were asked recently, if this is a medical problem, it's a medical problem, then why isn't it treated as a medical problem? And why can't people get some form of reimbursement? And I think that goes to Robin's point is people just don't think it's a really big deal, right? And it says, just go to the bathroom more often. That's not the answer.
Right, and that stigma that's attached to it really should not be there at all. There should be no stigma attached to having a problem like this. And that's why I think that why we are putting together a podcast like this, to be able to showcase the problem, to be able to make it more mainstream and not as much of a stigma, and that there are treatments and solutions available and people just don't know about them. We see things with AARP and other organizations that send you emails all the time with webinars, and they're always the same subject: Social Security, Medicare, and they never cover subjects like this, which absolutely should be covered, and we rarely see them.
I think the boomer population started some of this conversation, and that is when you hear them described, they're really clear that we're not going gentle into the good night. So as I get older, I have no intention of my great-grandfather's retirement, which is a rocking chair sitting on the front porch. And some folks want to do that, and they should do that because that's great. But the number of men and women that are starting businesses at 50 or 60 or 70, they're changing careers, they're doing things. Our population is really vital. It's really active. And they don't want to be seen as really old. So then why do you treat me like I'm really old, right? I need to find an incontinence solution that allows me to live the life to the fullest extent. And I get to determine that, not anybody else. And so it's one of those areas where we are hopeful, we are optimistic, but it's moving very slowly. This is not just a problem of the elderly. And by the way, we start to see people as young as 18 years old contacting us saying, I have this bladder problem, I leak. The number of people that suffer with bedwetting issues as adults, and some of those are really tragic. We got a correspondence from a young woman that said, I'm 18 years old, I've been suffering from bedwetting for the last 3 years. I'll never have a relationship in my entire life. And it's anonymous, but you want to go, we can help you. There are solutions for this. Call us, I'll find you a doctor. So we're hopeful, but it's moving way too slowly.
So what do you see as the future? You talked about how there haven't been a lot of new therapies that have been introduced, and you say that it's moving too slowly. Where do you see the incontinence care community in, say, 5 or 10 years from now?
What I would love to see is that since I get to make this up, I'd love to see that in a medical school, there is a moment or two, or at least a lecture dedicated to incontinence for all medical students. So if you have a primary care or other pieces, they at least have some general understanding of what these problems could be, and then encouraged to either refer them on or what that looks like, right? So that more people that say, I have a problem, somebody sits up and goes, okay, you've raised your hand and I think we need to do something about this. It doesn't mean that everybody has to do everything, but I could get them into the care of somebody who's focused on that. I think that would be great. Secondly, if we start having this conversation that, peeing and pooping, we all do it every day. Even the Queen does it, that we start recognizing that if it gets out of whack, there's something we need to do. Waiting and hoping it's going to get better is not an answer. We had hoped when I started in 2014 that if we could raise awareness of this, get people into care, we could potentially put ourselves out of business. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
But you can keep on trying.
Right. If there's a way that we could let people know that they don't need to suffer, and they certainly don't need to suffer in silence, and that they can live the life that they would like to live to their fullest, if we can help direct them to some of that, it's great. Now, here's the best part. What we want them to do is have a meaningful conversation with a doctor, with a nurse, with a physical therapist. What the treatment option that patient is offered is not really important to us, other than it should be efficacious, it should be safe, it should be well known. But what that patient and doctor decide is specific to that individual. And so we just want them to get it done.
Excellent. Well, I guess that's the biggest challenge then is motivating people to take action. There really are solutions that are out there. So, Steve, I think that on that note, that we have a hopeful future if people just start to advocate for themselves. We appreciate you spending the time talking with us and giving us insight into National Association for Continence. And anybody who is interested, you can find them online at nafc.org. That's nafc.org. And we look forward to speaking with you and other people who are involved with the organization in the near future, including physicians, including patients, caregivers, therapists, and learning more about just how treatable a family of conditions these are. And so thank you, Steve.
It's my pleasure.
Life Without Leaks has been brought to you by the National Association for Continence. Our music is Rainbows by Kevin MacLeod. More information about NAFC is available online at nafc.org.